Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Leah and I are going to go over virtual interviewing best practices today. My name is Richard Epperly. I'm an inclusive hiring talent sourcer for Microsoft. I sit within global talent acquisition, and I focus on Microsoft's disability and autism hiring programs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Gertos, and I'm a campus recruiter with EY. I manage hiring efforts for campus recruiting, so I hire students for internship and full-time opportunities within EY. So we're going to go ahead and just jump into the agenda here. First, we're starting out with virtual interviewing preparation. Then we'll cover testing and preparing your technology, followed by troubleshooting and closing it out with creating the optimal environment. So when it comes to virtual interviews, we first want to discuss what is a virtual interview. So a virtual interview is an interview conducted utilizing virtual technology. You won't be sitting in the same room with an interviewer, but you'll be at your own home or a location of your choosing. Virtual interviews can be taken in a variety of ways. The first is a pre-recorded video interview that is going to ask you questions that you'll then record yourself answering and submit them to the company that you're interviewing for to be evaluated and reviewed. The next is going to be a live video. This is going to be similar to a Skype or a FaceTime, in which you are using virtual technology to be speaking with a company and interviewing in real time. The next is going to be a live panel, similar to a live video interview, except you'll be interviewing with multiple different people. This could be in the same room or different rooms, but still utilizing that virtual technology, interviewing with multiple people. The final is going to be a case study. A case study is really going to depend on the company that you're interviewing with. The company can send you the materials beforehand to review or send you the materials during the interview, but this will happen virtually again. So going into virtual interviews, we want to talk about why they are a good thing. So starting out with the candidate perspective, virtual interviews are convenient and flexible for you. You are able to choose where you're doing these interviews at and when you're doing them. It's going to be a consistent and fair process throughout. You're going to be having the same experience as the next person who's interviewing for the same position, and it's going to enable you to choose how to best showcase your personality, skills, and experiences. Moving into the employer perspective, employers have the ability to fairly and consistently evaluate candidates. So just like we talked about with the candidate perspective, employers are going to be hearing the same questions for each candidate that's interviewing for the specific position to be able to evaluate them fairly throughout the process. It's also going to help move candidates more quickly through the recruiting process, as well as more efficiently utilizing the professional's time in the recruiting space. Now that we know what virtual interviews are, why they're a good thing, it's time to prepare for the virtual interview. So when you're preparing for a virtual interview, it's going to be very similar to how you would prepare for a normal in-person interview without memorizing a speech. So think about and practice articulating why you want to work for that company and in that position. You'll want to do your research on the company and the position and relate your experiences, skills, and interests to that specific company and the position in which you're applying for. Have your elevator pitch ready. An elevator pitch is a great go-to for those types of questions like, who are you? Or tell me a little bit more about yourself. Another tip is to know what's on your resume. Be able to articulate what you did and talk about specifically what you contributed to your previous experiences or projects. Share experiences you are most proud of, relating them to the job for which you are applying. Think about what you want your potential future employer to know about you. And remember, this is the opportunity to tell your story past your resume. When you're in an interview, a very common type of interview style you'll be asked is behavioral style questions. These are looking for specific examples and stories that you can share in a specific instance. So some go-to stories to have top of mind and, practiced is stories relating to teamwork and group assignments, challenges you have faced and overcame, leadership experience, and relevant past job experiences. These are all some tips to have to prepare for a virtual interview when it comes to content. But now we're going to want to have some tips for preparing your technology in a virtual interview. You're going to want to check and double check your technology before entering that virtual interview. So before the interview, find out what application will be used and install it prior to the interview. Teams and Zoom are commonly used applications for virtual interviews. You'll be able to find the application information in the confirmation email from your recruiter. And if it's not located in there, don't hesitate to reach out to your recruiter so you are able to be familiar with that type of application before the interview. You'll want to test that the application is working. You should be able to join and leave the meeting anytime. And if you are using a laptop, a phone, or a tablet, fully charge your device prior to the interview. You don't want the low battery signal popping up on your device during the interview and distracting you, or even worse, having your device die on you while you're conducting your virtual interview. Additionally, some more tips for checking and double checking your technology is that you're going to want to confirm that your webcam and microphone work properly in the chosen application. Test your internet connection to ensure it is strong and working. You don't want the internet to drop during the virtual interview. And if you are using headphones, make sure that they are connected and selected prior to the start of the interview. So we do know that we cannot always 100% rely on technology. And if you do have technical difficulties or issues arise, you will want to know how to best troubleshoot. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Richard to talk more about troubleshooting during your virtual interview.
Great. Thanks, Leah. That's some really great tips. So it's the day of the big interview. You double checked your technology and then you run into a technical issue. Well, first off, don't panic. The number one rule in IT is to turn off the device and turn it back on again. Or in this case, maybe start closing that application and then restarting that application. If that doesn't work, the next thing is to check your email confirmation that you received from that recruiter. And there should be a toll-free number that you can use to call in with your phone. If those two steps still don't work for you, you should always have that recruiting contact information nearby so you can give them a call or email them immediately, letting them know that you're having that trouble. Now that we've gone over some of the troubleshooting, I want to go over how to create the optimal environment to make sure that you're successful for your interview. You want to make sure that you're conducting your interview in a organized space that's going to be most conducive to your interviews. So there's two graphics here. The graphic on the left really shows a messy desk full of office supplies and clutter and not a lot of workspace. That's going to be very distracting for you during that interview. You may look down and see a notepad about a grocery list, and now you're thinking about the milk that you need to go purchase at the store. So you definitely want to make sure that that workspace is clean and organized. The other graphic on the right really shows what that looks like. It's a clean desk. It only has the things that you're going to need to be successful in the interview. Maybe a pen and a notepad as well, so you can capture any notes. Additionally, you're going to want to make sure that you tidy up your surroundings. If you are using that web camera, it's going to be hard to convince an employer that you're detail-oriented and organized if you really have a messy room. So there's two graphics here. The one on the left really kind of showcases my room. There's papers all over the desk and piled up in the corner there. That's not only going to be distracting for you during that interview, it's also going to be really distracting for that interviewer to focus on you and make sure that that interview is successful. The other picture on the right really shows what a clean, well-lit room can look like, which will help that interview focus on you for that interview and hopefully make sure that you're successful. In some situations, you may not be able to clean up that messy room. And so one quick tip on this is considering using a background effect, which will help instantly organize a messy room. I know both Teams and Zooms have that capability, but so do a lot of other applications. Another thing you want to consider when you're doing these interviews is to make sure that you switch all of your other devices to silent mode or have them off. This also includes the device in which you're using to conduct the interview. You don't want like an IM messenger in the background going off. That's not only going to distract you, but that's also going to kind of ping those notifications. Additionally, you want to make sure you still have that phone handy and nearby. So that way, if the interviewer is actually having those technical issues, they likely will call you on that phone. So make sure you still have that handy. Lastly, to create that optimal environment, you still want to dress for the part. I often tell candidates to wear whatever they're going to feel most comfortable and confident in wearing. At Microsoft, I've seen candidates wear shorts, sandals, and a shirt and get the job. I've also seen candidates who really prefer to wear that full blazer and tie because that's what they really feel comfortable and confident in. So these pictures show some examples. All the people are wearing jeans and a nice business attire top. So we want to go into some resources that you can use as well. There's some additional resources on how to prepare for a virtual interview. Also, just because this is a virtual interview, it doesn't mean you don't want to prepare as you would for a normal interview. So we've also provided some tips there as well. You can also email Microsoft's alias at dcareers@microsoft.com. That's DCAREERS@microsoft.com. We also have some example interview questions that you can study, as well as some inclusion strategies for companies to kind of follow. And then always definitely check out roles. EY has a link to theirs, and you can always visit Microsoft's career site as well. And with that, we're going to wrap up and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are all beaming live from across the country, and we really just appreciate that you are here. You may recognize a few of the faces, so I will be our moderator. My name's Sean Baker. I work with EY, so one of the organizations here, Microsoft. Thank you again for having us join. But I'm going to ask a few questions just of our folks who've been presenting to learn a little bit more about this subject and help folks get prepared. And then also just want to refer those resources that you saw previously. We'll certainly make sure that those get out to folks so you're able to click on those links and go from there. So I'm going to start off. I've got a question to Leah, more about this topic of video interviewing. And you specifically talked about pre-recorded video interviews. I wanted to, know a little bit more about that. And, if I have time where I'm going to do an interview, can I take all the time? Can I do multiple takes? What does that look like if I'm just on a video and not there in person?
Right. So pre-recorded video interviews are basically asking you to record yourself answering the question. At EY, we do give you a specific amount of time to answer that question. You can definitely use the full time, but you do not have to. I want to make sure that you are giving the content that's fully answering the question. So as long as you are fully answering the question, showing your experiences and your skills, then you are good to go to move on to the next question. Don't feel like you're watching the clock to fill the whole time. Sometimes you tend to ramble on when you are doing that. At EY, we do give you 2 takes so that if the first round you do not like your answer, you can go ahead and re-record yourself answering. But most of the times that first record is going to be the best. So always recommend just preparing and answering the question completely, and then you can move on to the next question.
Well, nice. Well, thank you for that, Leah. I do have a question. My next question is to Richard. We've got likely a lot of folks that have some technical background in the room, and I was wanting to know a little bit more about some of the assessments and technical questions asked from Microsoft, and then maybe some of the what are some of the programming languages that people might need to learn to be prepared for a certain Microsoft interview.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of different assessment platforms out there. Codility is one that Microsoft's currently using. Typically, it's a set of programming questions that you're going to receive, and then you're going to want to answer those. So that's also a great way to practice. A lot of those have free sites that you can visit and practice those technical assessments. And typically, you'll have a score related to that. And then definitely make sure as you're coding those out that you're also thinking about testing that code and any bugs that show up before you compile it. Because a lot of them will show that time of compiling it, then going back to your code and compiling it again. So you want to try to be thorough the first time. When it comes to the programming language, I always mention lower stack programming languages can be helpful, just because it really covers all the fundamentals of computer science. Java, C++, C, those sort of languages. But when it does come time for that interview, I would say, use that programming language that you're the most comfortable and confident in. It's definitely not that time to experiment with a new language and try to learn that.
Nice. Thank you, Richard. Well, we talked about the technical side of it. I'd really like to hear from you both a little bit more about some of the behavioral interview questions. How does one answer those? Leah, what do you think?
Right. So when it comes to behavioral style interview questions, we're really looking for specific examples that are going to show that you as a candidate have the skills and experiences to be successful and qualified for the job. So I always recommend using the STAR method. This will really set you up for success. If you're not familiar with the STAR method, basically the S stands for the situation. So what was the situation that you're in? T stands for task. So what were the tasks? A stands for action. What action did you take? And then R stands for result. So what was the result of that action? So when you are using the STAR method, you are really set up using that outline to answer the question completely while showing the specific skills that you have for the position.
One thing I love to do for myself is I'll have two resumes. First resume is the resume that I apply with. The second resume, I have bullets, and underneath the different projects I may have worked on, I have my own way of capturing what that project was, kind of listing that STAR method. So that way I can quickly glance at my resume, realize the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So it's just easy for me to refer back to it and hopefully not get lost in trying to think about what I did, because it'll be there for me to read.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So my next question actually is along those lines. What are some of the pitfalls or mistakes that you've seen people make on interviews that may be very correctable?
Yeah, I'll chime in to start. I think the first one that I see often is not taking the time to process the question. So it's okay to pause, take that moment. You maybe write it down, or it's a virtual world now for a lot of people. So you can even have them write that question in an IM chat so you can kind of revisit it. So I think that would be the first thing, is really take that time to process that question.
Right, preparing is going to be key. It's okay to take a few seconds and think it through. We're not expecting you to have an answer on the top of your head. And I always just like to mention, we don't look for perfection. We are looking for humans. So don't feel that you have to answer everything completely. We're looking for the content of your answers. We don't want it to be perfect or using all of this elaborate language or trying to, show all of your skills in a different way. Just be yourself and really show who you are, and you'll be fine.
Another thing that makes me think about is, believe it or not, interviewers want you to succeed. They want you to do well on your interview. And so, especially on the technical side, you'll get hints or tips along the way, trying to get you through the answer and trying to help you. So it's really helpful to pause throughout your questions sometimes and listen to that interviewer and listening to those hints.
Those are great, guys. Yes, thank you for sharing those tips. And now we want to transition a little bit into now that we have these virtual interviews, we're doing this from the rooms of our houses. I'm very curious just about some of the technological issues that sometimes people face. So Richard, I know you've put a lot of thought to this. So tell me a little bit about what happens if somebody needs more time. What happens if the video skips or the bandwidth isn't strong enough? What do you have? What kind of suggestions do you have for candidates as they go through that?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely think about accommodation request if you need it. A virtual setting, cannot always be the best setting for everybody. So you may need that additional time for your interview. So
Yeah,
definitely,
Haruko.
make that request. And then, you can do background effects, which can be really helpful to tidy up that area, as we mentioned, but that can also cause a little bit more of lag on your internet. So turning that off, you may also have to turn off your camera completely if needed. If you're able to plug in directly to the internet with using a cable, that would be like ideal to really help some of those technical issues that you may face. Lastly, you can always just call using your phone if you had to.
Yep,
Nice.
I've seen that happen a lot where you have to use the phone and call because something happens on your internet or with the virtual platform. So it's okay if that happens.
Yeah, thank you. And what about using background effects? What about, I know you guys talked about the clutter and spaces and trying to clean up some items, but what if I wanted to use some of those cool backgrounds for Teams or maybe another platform?
Yeah. So as we switch to virtual, there's more and more discussion about the background effects you're using. I think it's a unique way that I learned recently to actually share some of your personality. Maybe it's a hike that you've done, or maybe it's a picture you painted, or something else that you really relates to, and it's going to be helpful to show a little bit of your personality if that's what you're trying to get across. I would say just don't make sure it's not too distracting, because you don't want that background effect to take away from the interview itself.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'd like to hear a little bit more, about some of the other roles that we have. So I'm gonna shift just our agenda here a little bit. So Haruko, I know you've participated and been a key member of what's called our Neurodiversity Center at EY, and we brought you on too just to be able to take a break from this topic and share just a little bit about that. And then Richard would love to hear from the Microsoft perspective as well. With certain areas that you guys have. So yes, Haruko, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, Sean. So EY's Neurodiversity Center of Excellence, really what we do is hire individuals with different cognitive difference. So they may be on the autism spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, and so forth, and really leveraging the power of cognitive difference and perspective that people bring to kind of our business advantage. So there's a lot of business imperative in the initiatives that we do. We do focus more on the technical side. So the individuals that we do look for in terms of qualification is for individuals to be able to be proficient or knowledgeable of at least one or more programming languages. And then our area of focus in terms of business is around automation, innovation, blockchain, cybersecurity, anything data analytics, data mining, data integration, data visualization, and any emerging technologies are the areas of focus for us. But Sean, is there anything more that you would like us to me to cover? We're currently also recruiting, so if anybody's interested, they can certainly reach out to us.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that, and I think it's key to note too. Maybe where are some of these roles? And Richard, after would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We currently have 5 centers. We launched our initiative back in 2016 of March in Philadelphia. Ever since then, we've launched in Chicago, Dallas, as well as Nashville and San Jose. But we are recruiting for Boston, Alpharetta, or Atlanta, I apologize, Cincinnati, are 3 of the other future locations that we're looking into. And more outside of the US, we are actually recruiting for Toronto as well.
So I'll dive in and talk a little bit about Microsoft's autism hiring program, which really starts with the resume for candidates. You're really thinking about that screen-in mentality. We know that there may be gaps in employment, or people may not have that traditional background of education. And so it's really looking at the skills required to do the role, and there's lots of ways candidates can demonstrate that ability. After that, we really invite candidates to come out to a multiple day event where they get to meet the hiring teams in an informal setting. They get to work on collaborative projects. We also give a chance to do a mock interview, which is just like a regular interview you would do at Microsoft, except we then give all that feedback from that interview back to you to use for future interviews. And then we typically wrap up the week with final round interviews. Normally there's about 3. There's breaks built in between. We allow candidates to code on a device as well. And then, if somebody is hired through that program, there's a lot of support and accommodations provided once you're here as well. Microsoft
thank you for that.
We also have our ability hiring program, which is really focused on all disabilities. It's typically a one-day event, but a lot of the built-in accommodations, breaks between interviews and coding on a device if it's a technical interview, to help candidates be successful for those interviews.
Yes, thank you guys. And we have just a few more minutes left for a few more questions, and we do have another good list to go through, but I also want to share just from both our perspectives, there's so many different opportunities within so many different functional areas of each of our businesses. And, we're just very excited to, be able to talk to you guys about virtual interviewing, but also want to make it, very clear that there are, lots of different areas and competencies, within the roles that just, have a lot of different, cool things going on. So across the country. And I do want to, take the, this last couple of minutes just to ask, Richard. Richard's an expert in these questions that we're going to ask, and wanted to hear about, if somebody has an accommodation, if somebody, wants to, doesn't know how to disclose the disability in the interview process, what recommendations do you have for them? If it's a job or an interview accommodation request, or specifically a disability that somebody may not know or want to disclose.
Yeah. So I often think about this as the why to disclose, when, and how. So why? There's a lot of reasons. One, you want to make sure that interview is accessible for you and that you can truly be successful. And without it being accessible, it will be much harder in that sense. As well as there may be things that you do during the interview that may lead to the interviewer being distracted, or now you're thinking about that maybe quirk you have, and now that's distracting you. Maybe it's talking out loud to process questions, or getting up and pacing around the room. So that's one reason why to disclose, is to eliminate those distractions and make sure it's accessible. When, I always say to do it early on and as often as you need to make sure, because you want to make sure that all processes of the interview is going to be accessible for you. Typically how you want to do that with somebody in HR or recruiting, and you can tell them as much as you want or as little as you want. So you can be very vague and say, I have a disability and I would like this accommodation. Or you can be specific and say, I have this specific disability, and because of this disability, I would want this accommodation. So that's some of the why, when, and how.
Yes, thank you for covering that, Richard. And I just want to say we are a little short on time to be able to cover additional questions. But I really appreciate each person who's come on today, who's shared about our respective organizations. Microsoft, thank you for inviting us today. Any final words that anybody wants to cover?
I'll just add, you can always email the dcareers@microsoft.com alias, which you'll get the link to for any questions that we may not have gotten to, and we would love to hear from you.
All right. And yes, I hope everybody has had a great time at the Ability Summit. Continue to get, just great chance to learn, through this session. We all wish we could see everybody in person. I know I've been there before as well. And hopefully one of these days we're all going to be able to get back together and, go through this in person.
Well, good luck, everybody, on the next virtual interview.